burnout this, burnout that. All I hear in today's work-life balance culture is people talking about how burnt out they are. In this video, what I want to share with you is exactly why people aren't actually burnt out, but rather they're more than likely overcharged. I'm going to break down the 4 different quadrants of energy that exist in our lives so that you can better understand how to manage this energy and be able to operate at a much higher level mentally, physically, emotionally, so that you never again have to think about or fear the thought of burnout or depression or any of these things that people identify with. And before I dive into it, I do want to preface and say, as someone with a background over the past decade in psychology, I want to acknowledge depression is a real thing and it can be very serious. So by no means in this video do I mean to denounce its validity, but rather I want you to really understand, if you're someone that experiences depressive symptoms, why you might be experiencing them and why you're actually way more in control than you might think. And so rather than embodying that label, let's think about how we can shift that perspective and understand how to manage your energy in a way where you no longer feel depressed. And that leads me to my first point, is when you hear the word depression, what do you think? You think sinking, you think pressure. And with that, it's no surprise that for millennia, different cultures and people have described, philosophers, religions have described stress, anxiety, depression as a heavy feeling. And as an exercise of focus, I'm not going to take this video in the metaphysical route, because I want to keep it very scientific, very specifically psychology and neuroscience based, with a little bit of physiology mixed in as well. Because there are plenty of other woo-woo gurus out there that will take it in that direction. And while, hey, there might be some fun validity to it, that's not what I want to do today. So with that said, let's just dive right in. I'm gonna give you those 4 quadrants, and I think you're definitely gonna wanna stick around for the last quadrant, because it's more than likely why you're sitting in this position, why you're looking to improve yourself, improve your skills, and figure out where to take your business or your life. So without further ado, the first quadrant here is the emotional energy quadrant. And emotional energy is one of the things that's most prevalent to us every single day when we're experiencing stress, anger, excitement, joy, fear, any of those things, that all carries energy. And you hear the typical psychologist or your high school therapist talk about your emotions as a balloon. And if you keep inflating the balloon, eventually it'll pop unless you express your emotions. When it comes to emotional energy, you need to have one of 3 different outlets. So here's that diagram here. If we just open up this first, second, and third release, these are the 3 ways where you can release your emotional energy through movement, expression, or decision. And one thing important to understand here, as stress builds through all these emotions, cortisol builds up in your system. And what this means is your body is actually storing all of this emotional energy as physical tension through the response that your body has to cortisol. And what cortisol does is it actually creates that tense feeling in your chest, your shoulders, those knots in your stomach. That's a physiological response to stress. And so without allowing all of that emotion to escape through one of these 3 things, you're gonna feel tense. If emotional energy doesn't move, it will overflow. That brings us to the next quadrant, which is cognitive energy. And cognitive energy can be made up of a few different things. Here you'll see tasks, your worries and fears, decisions that you have to make. All of these things take up space in your brain. And one thing that we've learned is your brain hates unfinished business. And that's what we've learned through the Zeigarnik effect, studied by Bluma Zeigarnik in the early 1900s, where it was found that waiters actually remembered the orders of their customers while the tabs were open. But as soon as those tabs were complete, their ability to recall that information diminished drastically. So what does that tell us about the human brain? Well, it means it holds on to unfinished business. And what that does is it adds on weight to our cognitive load. And so when it comes to cognitive load, if you think of it as a finite resource, your brain only has so much energy. And if X amount of that energy is allocated to one thing, worrying, deciding, any of these things, it inherently cannot be allocated to another thing until that energy is restored through completing tasks, eliminating worries, or making decisions and taking action on them. And speaking of taking action, that brings us to the third quadrant, which is physical energy. And what's special about this quadrant is your body actually produces energy in expectation of action. Adrenaline, all these fight or flight responses, right? Our body has a reaction to tell itself, hey, it's time to act, it's time to go. Well, what happens when your body feels those responses, feels a perceived threat through your fears and worries and all these things, but then doesn't actually take action? Well, your physical energy builds up and builds up and builds up. And what that means is your energy becomes pressure. And so when it comes to releasing physical energy, well, that's pretty self-explanatory, hence no extra writing here. You need to move your body because that movement will actually help your body metabolize stress. That's where you get into the conversations of somatic load and how your body physically stores tension as a byproduct of unprocessed emotions, thoughts, feelings. And then there's also polyvagal theory, which indicates that your nervous system naturally shifts between safety, stress, and shutdown states depending on its perceived threats. And the only way to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and digest system, versus the fight or flight system of the sympathetic nervous system, is to actually initiate some sort of physical movement or stress so that all of these chemicals in your body can release and find an outlet, which is what causes your cortisol to lower, therefore decreasing the tension in your muscles. And then finally bringing us to quadrant number 4, the reason why so many of us feel stressed throughout our day-to-day is because our never-ending pursuit of financial success. So quadrant number 4 is financial energy, and that also includes social energy, and I'll explain why in a second. So first, just so you see here, my artistic abilities, up here we have flow, financial flow, social flow. You have a river. When water moves, it can be very powerful. However, when it stagnates and it has no way to flow, not only is it not powerful, it actually becomes toxic. So think of a still pond versus a flourishing river. Life, no life. And so yes, money is energy, and so are relationships. And funny enough, one is usually a heavy influence on the other. You either have a lot of money and therefore people want to be around you, or you have a lot of really healthy, great relationships and therefore money flows to you. Both require movement in order to stay alive. And so if we think about that still pond, stagnation of any kind reduces value. Specifically as it relates to money, we see that through inflation. If you keep your money in a standard checking account and you don't invest it anywhere, it actually loses value because it is not moving, it is not serving you in any way. And so part of releasing that financial energy means investing in books, coaching, hobbies, anything that help you grow as a person to unload that battery a little bit and allow for freshly recharged energy to come in. Again, if we think of all of this as a lithium battery, right? And you have 4 little cores in the battery, being each of these 4 segments. If you continue to charge a lithium battery without using it at all, what happens is it expands and eventually it explodes because there's nowhere for that energy to go. And we as humans are a culmination of all these 4 different quadrants and are the same way. If we don't allow energy to escape in any of these 4 areas of our lives, we will feel stressed, we will feel depressed, we will feel heavy throughout our day-to-day. And that speaks to the importance of taking massive action in any direction. You might have heard of the velocity of money, which when you think about that word, it clearly indicates movement. Money begins to compound and gain value when it's in motion versus when it sits still. And so in the world of entrepreneurship, for example, right, that fearful entrepreneur that is unwilling to let go of the little money that they have because what if it goes away? Well, they're directly contributing to their own stagnation versus when they can improve their internal operating system, become more confident, opportunistic, money starts to flow and therefore compound and grow in value. And social energy works in a lot of ways very similar to this through a phenomenon that we call actually vagal tone, which is your body or your innate ability to shift into states of connection or engagement, or have moments of extroversion, as you might hear. I myself, for those that care to know, historically would have identified as a very introverted individual, stemming back to high school, college, always kind of melting into the corner of a room, out of fear of rejection or not wanting to socialize or feeling drained by that. Now, if you met me now, you might think, oh, what a personable guy, social, all these things. A lot of that is just me having more control over my energy to be able to shift into different tones given the circumstances. And I think a part of that comes again through rebuilding your identity from the ground up to match the type of energy that you want to put out into the world, to therefore create space for fresher, newer, more abundant energy to flow in. And all of that flow of energy is bringing opportunity through behavioral activation. And what behavioral activation speaks to is the idea that our behaviors, the actions that we take, create physical energy and momentum, and clearly way more effectively than the idea of overthinking or analysis paralysis and not taking any action. So while you might think that you need to feel the motivation in order to act or behave in a certain way, sometimes it's the inverse. That physical behavioral activation is actually what releases your energy or momentum internally, cognitively or otherwise, to be able to act in accordance with your goals. So money, relationships, opportunities, they all grow through movement. And stagnation not only kills vitality in money, in marine life, but also people as well, and your opportunities. So I hope that this video gave you a little bit of clarity around why you feel heavy or stuck or burned out, and hopefully gives you a bit of perspective on how to shift that. So if you found this helpful, I'd love for you to comment, subscribe, let me know what you want to hear more of. I also have way deeper frameworks built out that I would love for you to check out around my clarity stack, my performance freedom engine, and ways for you to relentlessly take action and align yourself and your identity with the version of you that is required to achieve your goals. So I'll link one of those videos right here for you to check out. And if you are a high performer, a business owner, an entrepreneur who wants help applying a lot of these things into your day-to-day life, into your businesses, well, I coach a handful of people at a time and help them rebuild their own iOS, their internal operating system, around clarity, focus, and performance. So if right now happens to be a time where that type of help feels aligned with where you're headed, click the link in the description down here and I'll walk you through how that works. We can jump on a call and get things moving in the right direction. I hope you enjoyed. I'll talk to you in the next one. Peace.